Black Mirror's last few seasons have certainly been a mixed bag. At its best, the show is an incredibly astute observation on modern culture and the way it impacts the most basic fundamentals of our human experience. Trauma, love, reparations, validation, core tenets of what makes a person who they are, how we interact with others, and the way technology can intensify the very best and worst parts of us as people. An incredibly well-written piece of media with its finger pressed tightly on the pulse of technology, media, and politics. White Bear explores the dark and complicated morals of crime and punishment by keeping the revelation of Victoria's horrific crimes a secret until the climax of the episode. It's an effective way of lulling the audience into forming empathy for someone who has done something genuinely repulsive, whilst also highlighting the hypocrisy of strangers, people who are unaffected by Victoria's crimes, volunteering to take part in this deeply disturbing display of public degradation. This is, in my opinion, an example of Black Mirror at its absolute best. It explores a dark and uncomfortable element of human nature through its characters, taking advantage of its unique position as a show focused on technology to create a scenario that allows for a clear and biting piece of critical commentary. However, at its weakest, Black Mirror can feel like a parody of itself, hitting the surface level elements that make the show what it is without much substance. Smithereens feels like something a media student might pitch as an idea of what a Black Mirror episode looks like. Despite having an interesting and creative setup, the main commentary on addictive apps being delivered via a tragic car crash resembles a "don't text and drive" advertisement, and doesn't feel especially unique to modern technology or apps. Rachel, Jack, and Ashley 2 is generally more indicative of what I'm talking about. And when I say the worst of Black Mirror, I'm being purposely provocative here. I think it's more like something that falls short of its full potential. It starts off as a really interesting examination of how young people use celebrities and internet personalities as a coping mechanism, forming relationships that are not reciprocal. And despite being a lot of fun, I feel as though this concept is lost somewhat in the crazy heist shenanigans as the story progresses, and our protagonist actually kind of befriends her celebrity idol. And if that's what the episode wants to do, I'm more than happy to stick around for the goofy ride, but I feel like we lose a good chunk of those ideas set up in the first act. I'm not really sure how to feel by the end of the story. I think the first 2 episodes of season 6 demonstrate what I'm talking about here perfectly. They differ tonally, but explore very similar themes of media exploitation. Joan is awful and Loch Henry. Joan is awful, the opener to Black Mirror's long-awaited season 6, embodies a lot of the aforementioned issues I tend to have with the newer seasons. Like the Ashley episode, it is a fun ride you can easily switch your brain off to and enjoy. The performances are great, the story itself is incredibly engaging, and it's a great premise for a sillier Black Mirror episode. However, I feel like by the time the experience is over, we're left without any real meat to chew on in terms of the ideas and conversations raised within the narrative. The basic premise of the episode is that Joan, an individual with a seemingly unremarkable life, discovers that a Netflix substitute called Streamberry has utilized advanced computer AI to replicate and broadcast the most intimate details of her life via a legal loophole in their terms of service that users agree to at sign-up. It touches upon corporate data mining, the ethics of AI and deepfakes within media, how we as individuals consent to being public figures when we enter the online space, and the soulless nature of personal AI-generated art based on algorithms. Joan is Awful is a fun ride that throws a smattering of ideas at us, but in a similar way to Rachel and Ashley 2, I feel like the third act leaves the majority of those ideas on the floor. In a twist ending, Joan discovers that she is also a simulation, a fake television show mimicking the life and actions of real Joan. Everyone we're watching is a licensed celebrity AI deepfake. And what does the show have to say about that? Well, I'm not entirely sure that it's bad, I suppose. Before we get a chance to see how this impacts Joan and the other ideas propositioned to us earlier in the episode, IRL Joan smashes the supercomputer content machine and destroys the very universe our Joan exists in before promptly being arrested. What did we learn here? What did Joan learn? As we discover more information about how all of this works, it prompts questions like, at what point does monetizing the human experience become unmarketable to corporations? If we as a culture thrive off negativity, are individuals responsible for changing how these dictatorial algorithms work? What does Joan, as an individual already caught up in and sick of the algorithm and rigid structure of her own life, need to address and change about herself to escape? Joan does have an arc where she develops some agency and succeeds in escaping her unfulfilling routine by destroying the simulation, and the twist could demonstrate our tendencies to view someone we don't actually know and still make assumptions about them based on how they're portrayed and depicted without hearing their voice or inputs. But I can't quite piece together how Joan's arc of smashing up the machine is a challenge to this in any significant way, or how it links to the various themes and ideas laid out earlier in the episode. If the computer had not been smashed, there is a really interesting dilemma for our Joan. With her being the first layer of simulation, in order to exist in this digital world, she must consent to Streamberry's terms of service and accept the fact that her privacy and self-image is no longer something she has control over, just like we have to do in real life. We are essentially forced to alienate ourselves from online spaces or accept the terms of service presented to us. But because our Joan is not actually Joan, this revelation means very little for the person we have been following all episode. She has no real agency, no decision to make, and no reason or time to consider this unique situation. Smashing the computer feels like an easy solution that once again doesn't really relate to the larger conversations going on in the episode. And it's a little bit like what Harry Potter did with Mad-Eye Moody. The character we watched in that fourth film was not actually Mad-Eye, but when he returns later in the franchise, we're expected to connect with him as though he's the same person. And Black Mirror has a similar issue here. It makes the ending shot of Joan smiling a bit underwhelming because although our Joan lives the same events as Joan IRL, they also establish that there are subtle differences between how they talk and act. The climax also demonstrates simulation Joan has independent thoughts separate to Joan IRL.
The fact that I'm standing here right now means that Source Joan already stood here in reality, so it doesn't matter what I want because the events that this is based on have already happened.
Like, Joan IRL would not have any reason to say or think this, which must mean to some extent simulation Joan has her own independent awareness. So it feels like there could be enough differences to feel like we're watching the concluding arc to a slightly different character with a very different dilemma. Towards the end of the episode, when asked why Joan, why was she picked for this show, the CEO of Streamberry says this.
We were looking for a totally average nobody person, just to test the system.
I understand Joan is meant to prove them wrong, prove she isn't just a boring nobody, but I really don't feel like we see that much of a dramatic change outside of the Streamberry heist, or connect with her as a character in any way other than generally empathizing with her situation. We don't really know much about her as a character, probably purposefully so as we're essentially watching an AI depiction of IRL Joan, but I think this makes it hard to like or connect with her. At the top of the episode, there's a line about how Joan wants to run a coffee shop, and then during the end credits we see that's exactly what she's doing. And I understand the purpose of this is to show how Joan has changed, but a character saying they like coffee and would like to open a coffee shop, and that's really all I know about her, it just doesn't feel that compelling. And I know I sound like a broken record here, but the character's story just doesn't feel like it ties up the larger conversations about Netflix and data and harvesting people's likeness. You could have really placed Joan in any simulation story here. Simulation Joan's downfall could have been linked to genuine criticisms of services like Netflix. If new shows came out as planned, or she ceased to be interesting enough to depict in an inflammatory way, would that also potentially threaten their existence due to the nature of instant cancellation if shows do not immediately perform well? Would she have to start projecting a fake and toxic perception of herself, as many do? do in order to maintain interest and attention. I think there was a lot more to explore here, especially when you tie it to the idea of audiences being attracted to drama and negativity and how that creates an unhealthy dynamic between creators and viewers. In the same way they briefly touch upon women being paid less than men in the entertainment industry, a lot of valid and important observations are made and then seemingly dropped at random. I think this episode's biggest crime is maybe that it just loses focus of its own concepts the closer we get to the climax. And I think giving Simulation Joan a little more agency would have made the revelation at the end a little more interesting. It is by no means a bad episode, there's still a bunch of creativity and interesting themes to think about. I just think that the episode was cut off before it actually had a chance to breathe and ruminate on some of its ideas. The season's second episode, Loch Henry, tackles a very similar theme of media exploitation and uses Streamberry once again to take aim at Netflix and its tendency to exploit and sensationalize true crime, a topic I've touched upon on this channel a couple of times. I think Loch Henry is indicative of the aforementioned qualities that make a genuinely great Black Mirror episode, and is, in my opinion, a real return to form for the show. I've seen a lot of criticism levied at Loch Henry claiming that the premise isn't focused on technology, but I completely disagree. Remember, Black Mirror's first ever episode was about the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom fucking a pig, and while on the surface that isn't necessarily about technology, it is commenting on how traditional and new media act as a vessel for humanity's dark obsession with creating a live and shared spectacle out of shocking and morbid events. People can forget their humanity, and we are confronted with how that disassociation can manifest itself. So no, Loch Henry isn't about a computer chip that traps you in a simulation or lets you fuck a video game character, but it is about technology. Film, media, streaming services, it's all rooted in technology. The insidious nature of true crime content cannot exist or be commodified without data, views, ratings. The very nature of television and entertainment itself, it's all classic terrain for a Black Mirror episode to explore, especially considering the show exists on a platform that produces a lot of questionable true crime outputs. Loch Henry has clear criticisms of the subject it's commenting on, and the protagonist's personal story is deeply embedded in that criticism. To recap, Loch Henry follows two film students, Davis and his partner Pia, who have returned to Davis's struggling hometown of Loch Henry. After Pia learns of the town's infamous serial sex offender and murderer Ian Adair, and how Davis's father was injured during his arrest, eventually dying of an infection, the pair decide to shoot a true crime documentary revisiting the grim story. However, after scanning old VHS tapes belonging to Davis's mother, it's revealed that Davis's father and mother worked in tandem with Ian Adair to abduct and murder visiting tourists. Now, this is a pretty clear piece of commentary on how true crime media often removes the voice of its victims, focusing instead on the infamy and legacy of the killer, commodifying the trauma of families connected to the acts of violence. The characters in Loch Henry clearly set out to make this film for admiration, to boost their career, maybe win an award. The victims are not a real consideration. Their real motives are pretty transparent right out the gate.
How could someone do that shit? It's what the fuck? It's give me the details, and the details are so awful, it is irresistible. What do you want to make? A meditation on the Eggman of rum that will maybe play at a festival and maybe be admired by a couple dozen documentary nerds, or something that people will watch?
Cunts get a load of this place in their 4K fucking flat screens, and they will be crawling all over us like flies on dog shite.
Davis's very loose connection to the crimes give the characters a way to deflect criticism, a flimsy justification as to why they should be telling this story. Their interest in Davis's tentative link to the story is nothing more than a marketing trick, a half-truth used as a cynical selling point.
The first question any platform, network, whatever, is going to ask is, what's the hook?
His dad was one of the victims.
So he was murdered?
He died later.
Of his injuries? Or?
Not directly, but basically, yeah.
The horrific source material is treated with zero respect. The upbeat montage depicts the initial production as a fun holiday project that has a really uncomfortable tone about it. They cross so many ethical boundaries, and the actual crimes are treated like a complete joke.
He'll tie your hands behind your back!
In the dungeon!
And shove the bottle up your crack in the dungeon!
He'll break your elbows with the rock!
In the dungeon!
Their attitude here demonstrates how obviously disconnected they are from the actual murders. It's so trivial to them that they are able to crack jokes about the very people they purport to care about giving a voice to. And ironically, they very literally do give a voice to the killer. It is such a blatant and hilarious way of communicating this idea, but I think it works really well in the context of the episode. It feels like a classic bit of Black Mirror dark humor that's also quite intertextual. By the end of the episode, Davis gets exactly what he wants. His association to the crimes are cemented in a dramatic way, and he is awarded with a BAFTA for the film made about his traumatic experience. But Davis is not the one making the film. He experiences firsthand what it's like having someone else tell his story, having his own voice removed and his personal loss overshadowed by the sensationalized theatrics of it all. I think him standing on a stage, silently pushed to one side, is a perfect visualization of this. The film's, I assume, director, producer, I don't know, networking for future projects, turning her back to him as he has already become irrelevant. His trauma has been cashed in, and now it's time for everyone else to move on to the next thing. And as Davis sits in his hotel room, he feels the pain that he was previously so disconnected from. He got his award, but at the cost of experiencing what it's like to be exploited by the insidious machine of true crime. His story and the episode's cultural commentary are firmly and effectively linked. I know some people said they thought the twist of this episode was very obvious and out of pocket, but I don't know, maybe if you're sat trying to guess what the possible outcomes could be, you might find that. It was obviously building to a dark Tales of the Unexpected style ending, but I honestly didn't foresee the events of the episode. I also don't believe the literal twist is what lands the punch here. I think the real twist is seeing Davis planted in someone else's true crime documentary and experiencing the reality of losing control of his own story. I think the reason this episode works so well is because ultimately they kept it simple. They have a clear and pointed criticism of a particular type of media exploitation, and for that reason, the characters and story feel richer and more engaging. I understand what the filmmakers are trying to communicate to me. With Joan is Awful, the ideas and commentary felt too vague and confusing, and the connective tissue with its titular character felt slightly laboured. In my opinion, the simplicity also allowed the show to satirize Netflix a lot more effectively, because there is a specific folly being exposed. They can use the bombastic and overly dramatic editing of Netflix true crime documentaries to contrast with the bleak reality of what we just watched unfold within the episode. It just goes to show how this sort of output is interchangeable, lost in a sea of identical documentaries.
What was the name of that Netflix thing? About the guy that killed women?
Maybe narrow that down.
They abandon what sounds like a pretty weird and unique film idea for something that is not genuine or truthful. It's simply what sells to the morbidly curious masses. Speaking of which, if you enjoyed this video, very sudden and jarring segue here, please do give this video a like and consider subscribing to the channel. Please. I have some more videos planned out that will hopefully be dropping soon. Bye.